Welcome to the July 2025 Move to France Q&A. My name is Allison Grant Lounes. I am the owner of the relocation agency Your Transformation, and we help people to do the right admin, get the right visa to follow their dream of living in France. Last month, we had the 2025 Relocate to France Virtual Summit, which was a 4-day event with almost 700 participants and 20 presentations about all different aspects of living in France and how to ensure that you are preparing your move with all of the professional guidance and expertise that you need. So in this Q&A, we are going to cover some of the questions that you submitted in advance. This is the last Q&A for the summer, and then we'll start back up again in September. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the questions that were submitted, and then if we have time, I will be able to address some of the questions in the chat. Remember, this is not an individual personal consultation. This is meant to be a general introduction to the topics that can help everybody. So for some people who submitted multiple rounds of questions, the form enables you to submit 2, but if you submitted the form 3 times, then you might not get all of your questions answered. And I would encourage you to book an individual consultation with me. I am booked out, however, until the end of August following the summit. We do offer relocation services and packages for people who would like our assistance with preparing all of the documents and ensuring that everything that you need to do gets done correctly and in a timely manner. That's going to be even more important going forward. There's been a lot of changes in policy and how visa applications and renewals are being processed and evaluated. And we're going to get into that with some of the questions that you guys have asked. And I'm going to point out a few reasons why you want to make sure to not rely on Facebook comments and things on the internet that are going to be out of date and not necessarily useful for making sure your move is successful and sustainable. All right, so Kwame from Eru, is it best to hire a guarantor to assist in securing rental housing? Yes, if you're a foreigner and you're arriving in France, your best bet is to have something like Garant Me, where they are going to provide an insurance policy that you will pay for. It costs about 4.5% of 1 year rent, but that is going to provide a guarantee to the landlord who is then protected in case of non-payment or issues that they might have with you. Rental agencies generally are not going to look favorably on your application and not be able to insure you themselves if you have not been residing in France, if you don't have a CDI, if you don't have a guarantor in France. So this is one way to ensure you're able to find long-term housing after you arrive. What are the most common pitfalls, missteps, or oversights by applicants applying for the VLSTS visa? Okay, the VLSTS refers to about a dozen different visa types. So VLSTS stands for Visa de Long Séjour, meaning a 1 year or 12-month visa. Valent titre de séjour, meaning you validate it online and it becomes your first titre de séjour. So your first year, you don't have a physical plastic carte de séjour, you have a titre de séjour, which means you have a sort of virtual residence permit, which it takes the form of the visa sticker in your passport plus your validation document. Now, VLSTS can refer to a visitor visa, it can refer to a student visa, a private and family life visa, profession libérale, a classic entrepreneur that is not a talent passport, a salaried worker visa, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a lot of different visa types. The most common pitfalls are not being clear on what visa type you're applying for, what you need to demonstrate in order to obtain that visa. So our book that we have is now in its 5th edition. It's called Foolproof French Visas. So I would recommend that you read that book and take a look at what visa types are available to you and what you are eligible for and what the common mistakes are for that particular visa type. Joe, multi-generational family moving with family and 2 minor children. Is it okay to have the adults apply for different categories of visa? My husband would be retired, but I would continue to work remotely to begin. Parents of 2 minor children, one would work and one would not. Can married couples apply for different long stay visas? Yes. So in fact, on that visa type, you need to apply for different visas. Profession libérale, which you would have if you are being self-employed, does not enable your spouse to work or be entitled to a particular type of visa. So you're entitled to bring your spouse with you, but only under a visitor status. So it's natural that you would apply for different visa types. Now, if your spouse wanted to work in addition to you, then we would need to find a solution for him to be able to apply for a visa that enables him to work in some capacity separately from your visa that is granting you the right to work. Conversely, if you have a talent visa, so talent entrepreneur, they've just renamed it from talent passport to just regular talent. Apparently, the passport part was confusing. It seems like a little bit of a cosmetic change to me, but whatever. If you are in the talent category, then that does grant the spouse an accompanying family member visa, and that grants the right to work or be self-employed, et cetera. So it depends a little bit on what category of visa you are applying for. As a long-stay visa for self-employed, can all of your work be remote? So if you are applying for a profession libérale visa and you are going to be self-employed in France, then once you are here and you register your business, it does not matter where your income comes from. What matters is that you are a tax resident in France, you are invoicing from France, you are doing the work from France. This is where your main place of residence is, and you're declaring and taxing all of that income in France first per the tax treaty. That is once you arrive in France. Now, in order to get the visa, France issues visas to people who have, or work visas or self-employment visas to people who have legitimate projects and self-employment opportunities in France. So when you're putting together the visa application, it is really important to focus on not only what income might you have coming in from outside of France, but also specifically what business opportunities do you have in France that are going to provide you with some French-based income. Now, whether or not those people or end up hiring you, whether or not those networking opportunities work out and you get income from them, doesn't necessarily matter. What matters after you arrive is that you register the business, you do your income declarations, you're making money, you're getting up to French minimum wage, which is currently about 1,800 euros per month gross. The prefecture is really focused now on making sure that people are meeting the minimum income requirements from their business and from their business income relatively quickly. Finally, note that now the profession libérale visas need to be evaluated by DRITS, the Direction Interrégionale de l'Économie, something, something, et du Travail. I forget what all the letters of the acronym are. It is in the annex of foolproof French visas, but basically you need to get pre-approval from the regional work agency if you are foreign or looking to establish yourself as self-employed in France, and only then can you apply for your visa. That's a new process as of about 2 weeks ago. Can you assist with someone transferring their U.S. credentials as a licensed mental health counselor to obtain certification or license as a psychotherapist in Paris? Yes, that is something we can provide guidance on. It depends a little bit on what your original degree was. So if you are a psychologist and you have a psychology degree, the Order of Psychologists will allow you to submit an application and have your credentials transferred. And once you do that, you can get something called an ADELI number, which will enable you to take part in the French healthcare system as a psychologist, be registered, use the word psychologist in your marketing and any of your public information, and you can practice as a psychologist. If you are something like a licensed social worker, or you have some other type of counseling credential that is not psychology, then you will have to look into how you can practice as something called a psychopraticien, which is more of like a counselor, and it's not using the word therapist. And you have to be a little bit careful, especially in your business plan, and demonstrate, that you're not going to be doing anything that would fall under the purview of the regulated activity of psychologist. Karen, if I were to do an initial stay of 1 to 3 months and plan to continue seeing clients who are in the US, what kind of visa would I need? If you are a tourist traveling to France and you are on vacation, then you are not in any capacity becoming a French tax resident. So nobody is going to have an issue or even notice that you are Zooming or writing emails or whatever. But if you are arriving in France to reside and you need a visa, that is where you need to take into account the fact that you're going to be working and apply for the correct visa type that would enable you to do so. If I were to move to France and plan to continue seeing clients who are in the US, what kind of visa would I need? You would need a visa to run your business from France. That would either be a self-employment visa, which would be profession libérale. It could potentially be a classic entrepreneur visa, or it could be a talent entrepreneur visa, which is the one that requires the 30,000 euro investment, as well as either 5 years of professional experience or a master's degree in your field. Now, you don't say, Karen, what type of business or what type of client, so I can't really speak to that point or tell you what type of business structure would be best. That's something that we usually discuss in a consultation before I take people on as clients, especially for the business. For the business side of things, I do like to have an individual consultation, make sure that your business is a good idea, it's viable, it's doable in France. You're not going to be bumping up against any regulatory issues, that you are going to have the ability to develop the business side in France to the extent that it is going to be required by the Ministry of the Economy. And those are all questions that need to be resolved before you're ready to start the process. Christelle, I am applying for my French citizenship and I plan to move to France in the summer of 2026 with my husband and 2 kids, age 4 and 6. My husband works remotely for a company in Finland. They pay him as an independent contractor, so they don't pay into the US tax system. What visa would he need as a spouse of a French citizen to continue this job in France? Okay, so he would get a visa as a spouse of a French citizen, which will enable him to work. It will enable him to work in France and to be self-employed. So he will have to register as self-employed. Now, if that company is his only client, he's going to have a little bit of an issue, because then the French government is going to look at it as though it's a disguised employment contract. So either he's going to have to come up with some additional clients and make sure that this Finnish company is not the only company that he's doing work for, or he has to use something like a portage salarial, which is basically a middleman company. So they would invoice the Finnish company and then they would employ him and issue him pay slips and pay his social charges and all of that as though he's an employee. Same question as above, but what visa would I need if I do not have my French citizenship before we leave? Then he would have to get a visa to be self-employed. And you would also have to get a visa depending, you say you're a teacher and trying to find a teaching job. A teaching job is unlikely to be able to sponsor you because the salaries are typically not high enough. So in that case, you could also potentially get a visa to be self-employed as, a tutor or a private teacher of some kind, but being sponsored for an actual teaching position is going to be difficult. Even just passing the concours to be a teacher in the public school is going to be really tough, even if you are a citizen. Catherine, what is accurate timing to request a birth certificate and attain an apostille stamp? 1 month prior to departure in France, so under 3 months. Okay, so your birth certificate does not have to be less than 3 months old, and it does not have to have an apostille. You need to have a long form birth certificate from the state where you were born. That means that if your birth certificate looks like it was issued to a Cabbage Patch Kid, it is not the right document, and you need to request it from like Vital Check online. But yeah, unless you're like getting married or applying for naturalization or something like that, it doesn't need to be under a particular amount of time. If you're just using it for registering on the healthcare system after you arrive, then you can order it now and it'll be fine. Kim, if you initially get a micro-entrepreneur visa or something similar, can you pick up other work outside of your business when you're in the country? For example, you own a PR company but get hired for another job that pays better in the same career field once you've been in country a year or so. No. Your visa enables you to do the thing that visa is for. So if you are a micro-entrepreneur, you are allowed to be a micro-entrepreneur. You are not allowed to get any other type of work contract. We actually had a client about 2 years ago that tried to do that. She came with a talent passport entrepreneur. She had set up a company, invested 30,000 euros, and I was very clear about what she was allowed to do on that visa. And after she had been here maybe 5 or 6 months, and she was like, oh, one of my clients wants to hire me for a CDI. How do I switch my visa? And I was like, you don't. And the reason for that is, you go through all of the steps to set up the company. Your visa is attached to that. And yeah, if your company doesn't work out, if it goes bankrupt, then you would need to switch to another status, but it needs to be motivated. You can't just randomly decide after a few months that you're going to switch to some other type of visa status. Best case scenario, you get a 1-year card, you're successful. You get a 4-year card at your renewal. After your 4-year card, you can request a 10-year residence card. And on the 10-year residence card, you will be able to have other types of employment. So best case scenario is after 5 years, if you get a 10-year residence card, then you can look for a regular job. Do you know if VA disability payments can count towards overall income on any visa? I imagine it would be similar to Social Security or retirement benefits. Yeah, so it's considered passive income, and it would count in terms of if you are on a visitor visa, it would be passive income sufficient to support you on a visitor visa. However, if you are coming to France with a micro-entrepreneur visa, what they're looking for is they are looking at the income specifically from your micro entrepreneur activity. They do not care about other passive income or resources that you might have. Alfred, I need more details on how to minimize inheritance taxes, the names of tax attorneys that we can work with. We also have a trust, so that will need to be addressed as well. Yeah, it's really important to get those things taken care of or considered before you leave. I will give you a link to our referral form so that we can send you an email introduction. Cynthia, how to fill out the FBAR. I do an FBAR party every April so that we can all do the FBAR together. And I have an international bank account tracker that has a little instructional video on how to fill it out. So I will put the link for that in the chat as well. But basically the FBAR, for those of you who might not be aware, it's if you're a US person, meaning a citizen or a green card holder, and you have bank accounts outside of the US that have more than $10,000 combined at any point during the calendar year, you have to report all of your bank accounts on the FBAR, or sometimes called the FineSend form, which is sent to the IRS Financial Crimes Department to ensure that you're not trying to commit tax evasion by having accounts outside the US. I do want to point out too, in terms of the FBAR, is that sometimes people think that it is better to keep their foreign accounts to a minimal balance to avoid having to file the FBAR. However, that is going to cause you a lot of issues with your French visa and renewal, because they are looking at your bank statements. They're looking at how often do you transfer money, how much of a balance do you keep, are you in the process of making France the center of your economic and financial interests. And so not having a French bank account, or having a French bank account with a minimal balance where you're not making transfers of money regularly, can cause problems during the visa renewal process. Can one open up a French bank account online from the USA? No. You have to have an economic tie to France to open up a bank account here. So either that means you own property, or it means that you're in France with your visa and you're in the process of establishing residence. If you're in France, some banks you can do it online. Elizabeth, if I run my own consulting business, sole proprietor LLC, in the US with US clients, then apply and accepted for a visa de long séjour, should I or can I open a business in France in order to serve the clients in France? Yeah, so you will need to apply for a visa that enables you to run a business in France. And then depending on what type of business, how many clients, how much income your business has, how much expenses your business has, we would figure out the visa and the proper business structure. So you have basically three main options. If your income is under 77,000 euros per year and you don't have a lot of expenses, then you're going to go with profession libérale, which is basically a self-employment. You don't have any type of company structure, and it's a pay as you go. You invoice, you declare the following month, you pay about 26% of your social charges. So the social charge amount is lower. On the other end of the spectrum, if you have a higher income and you have a lot of professional experience, you're going to want to set up a French company, and then you can apply for the talent entrepreneur visa type. Now, this has the potential to be a multi-year card. They can issue you a carte de séjour for anywhere from 1 to 4 years from the beginning. So you might get a little bit of extra time to get your business up and running. It's ideal if you have more than 77,000 euros of income per year in income. You have to invest 30,000 euros in the startup capital of the company. You also have to have either a master's degree or 5 years of professional experience. You go through the process of setting up the company, putting together some legal documents, putting together a business plan, getting approval from the Ministry of the Economy, all kinds of stuff before you even start to register or start to apply for the visa. And then you have to do ongoing bookkeeping and have an accountant. And there's quite a few requirements that you need to keep track of while you're actually running your business in France. And then what they're looking for is that the company pays you a salary or a dividend or some combination thereof equivalent to at least French minimum wage. So the company certainly has to earn more money in order to be able to do that and pay all of the social charges on it. Again, it depends a little bit on how much income you're going to have. A company structure is better if you have a lot of expenses, or if you have a significant amount of expenses, because even though the social charge amount is higher, it comes into effect after you have been deducting all of your expenses. That's something where we have a comparison chart in our program, Complete French Business Incubator, where you put in the numbers for your expected income, your expected expenses, and a bunch of different categories. And then you can see what your net in-pocket amount is, depending on the business structure that you choose. It's also something that we talk through a little bit in a consultation. How does a 12-year-old child integrate into the public school system when they speak no French? Should we plan on doing online US school in addition to French public school for the first year semester? No. So French schools have a program called UPU2A. We had a presentation about this in the virtual summit last month. It's not in every school, but it's typically in one school per district, where basically it's French as a second language for children who are arriving who do not speak French. So the purpose of the UPU2A program is to get them up to speed in French as quickly as possible. So each child is assessed on their level. They are put into this specialized program and supported, and then they're evaluated regularly and progressively integrated into the mainstream classes. So children who learn French really quickly might start out with doing like gym and art and math in the regular classes, and then progressively get added to French and literature and other language classes and things like that. This is obviously for people arriving from any country in the world. So some countries might not have as high literacy rates, and those children might be in UPU2A for quite a while. But no, I would say that your best bet is to make sure that you get into an UPU2A really soon. At 12, she's going to be in either sixième or cinquième, which means that she's going to have to be evaluated by the regional education center before they pick a school for her. And not every school, not every middle school has a UPU2A program. So it's going to be dependent on where there's space available, and it might not be the closest one to your house. Karen, I am retired and only live on the UK state pension. I would be buying a house when I sell mine. There would be no savings, just the pension. That's fine as long as it's more than about 1,500 euros per month net for you. My daughter and her 2 children will be moving with me, and we will all be living together. She will have her income, which is £1,400 per month net. That's really on the limit for one person. She plans to work remotely and still keep her UK job. Okay, so in order for her to do that, her employer would have to sponsor her to be working in France, and she would have to have the visa type to work in France and have French social taxes paid on her income. So it's unclear from the post whether the job salary is £1,400 per month, in which case, 1, that's really low, and 2, it doesn't sound like something that they would be able to sponsor her for a visa for. So I would potentially rethink that plan. Her property would be rented out, so after the rent pays the mortgage, she expects it to leave around £300 per month on top of her wage. Okay, so the other thing to consider is that if the property is in the UK, it's always the country where the property is located that gets to tax the property first. However, you'll have to talk to a French tax advisor to see what the best way to report the income on the French tax declaration is, and whether or not they would take into account all of the expenses against the cost of rent. Because I think mortgage, you're able to deduct interest, but you're not able to deduct the principal. So it could make her look like she has more money on paper, not necessarily give her enough money to actually live off of. The other thing to take into consideration too is if she sells the UK property down the line, what are the UK capital gains tax rules and what are the French capital gains tax rules? And would she potentially owe French tax on the sale of that property? Those are questions for an accountant. But to answer your question, would this be enough to live on according to the French requirements for living there permanently? It doesn't sound like it. It sounds very tight, especially if there are children that would also be supported. Now, they can be a little bit lenient in terms of income requirements if you own property, because then they consider that if the property has been bought in cash, you don't necessarily have a monthly rent expense, although there are other expenses associated with owning property. But I would want to see all the numbers, because this to me seems like really just scraping by, and that it's going to be very difficult to live on that amount of money. Okay, so your other question was about the tax system regarding how tax would be paid in the UK or France, and is the tax declaration difficult to do? So you will want to consult a tax accountant who is competent in both countries and have that person do your tax declarations, at least for the first year, maybe 2, so you can see what it looks like. I'm not as familiar with the UK tax treaty as I am with the US tax treaty, but generally speaking, the UK does not have citizenship-based taxation, so most of your income is going to end up being taxable in France. The exception to that would potentially be the rental income, because as I said, rental income is usually taxed in the location where the property is located. Amber, I have a business full-time as a content creator on YouTube as a travel blogger. I'm confused on which visa to get, the Profession Libérale or the talent visa. Okay, so Profession Libérale would probably be the correct visa type unless you're earning more than 77,000 euros per year. It's not necessarily worth it to set up a company. In terms of the talent visa, there's also a Profession Artistique talent visa, but that's not really what they're going for here. A talent entrepreneur visa could be a possibility if your income is quite high and if you have a lot of travel expenses. But again, you would need to invest 30,000 euros in the startup capital of the company. And it's quite a long process to put together all of the documentation and do all of the different steps to get approval for the talent entrepreneur visa. So again, I would want to talk to you about, how much income, what are your sources of income, what are your expenses? If you're a travel blogger, what kinds of things are travel expenses? What's going to be deductible? What kinds of income and what amounts of income do you need to make every month to be sure you're paying yourself at least French minimum wage? Under the Profession Libérale business structure, you pay 40% tax. No, you pay 26% tax if you're a liberal profession, meaning if you provide services, for example. The social charge structure is slightly different if you're selling goods or you provide like commercial services rather than liberal services. But then do you pay more tax on a personal tax declaration? Do you take a paycheck in your business? So when you're Profession Libérale, the income to your business is income to you. And there are two steps. One is that every month you're doing your income declaration and you're paying about 26% social charges off the top. Again, we're assuming that you're doing some type of service. If you're a content creator, if you're doing tutoring, teaching, psychopracticien, consulting, anything like that would be liberal services, unregulated services, and it's going to be 26.1% in social charges. And then you're going to pay the social charges on that as you go month to month. Then at the end of the year, you do your income tax declaration, and that is where you get a 34% standard deduction. So if you make 30,000 euros in the year, you're going to pay income tax on 20,000 euros of that. And the reason for that standard deduction is because you are not allowed to deduct expenses as an auto entrepreneur. So it's taking into account the fact that you have social charges that you've paid, potentially some minor business expenses that you've paid along the way. No, on the visa form, it asks for surname and first name. Do we include our middle name? Yes. As a pre-retired, is it okay to put on the application sans profession? Yes. So if you are filling out your visa application, you only put retired if you are actually retired and receiving a pension. If you are retired but living off of savings and you are not yet receiving a pension, like Social Security, IRA, 401k, whatever, then you put sans profession. If you put that you are retired, they want to see a pension statement. What is the next step in case of visa rejection? Well, hopefully it won't get to that point. I would say the next step, if you get rejected, is that you want to consult with somebody to try to determine why it got rejected. And I've looked over documents for people to try to understand why their application has been rejected and what could have been a red flag for the consulate. But ideally, you want to be consulting with somebody before and getting help with the visa application before you apply to minimize the chances of rejection. Eric, I am a US citizen. I have some experience teaching English as a second language. I am investigating enrollment in a language instruction master's degree program in France and then either working for a company or freelance. Do you have any suggestions regarding the different degree programs or any particular suggestions regarding this plan? Well, first of all, I would say that English as a second language is not very well paid in France. Even as a freelancer, you're going to be not paid very well, and it's really difficult to get up to making 1,800 euros per month. I would expect that these are the types of businesses that are going to have the most difficulty getting approved under the new system of getting approval for Profession Libérale from the Ministry of the Economy. I'm not sure that it's worth doing a master's. I don't think that will make a significant difference in pay. There are plenty of schools and individuals who are willing to hire tutors who are native English speakers without necessarily them having a particular degree in that thing. That being said, we do have a lot of clients who are teaching English or tutoring or something, and there are ways to position yourself and work with different types of clients that are more likely to pay you more. So if you're doing various kinds of professional training. If you're working in particular industries with startups and you're training people professionally, or they're looking to advance their careers, or they're in the sciences and they want to improve their English to go to conferences or present or things like that, where people are developing their language skills for professional reasons, then absolutely you can charge higher rates and you're more likely to get up to that 1,800 euro per month mark. But you want to be really careful when you're doing something like that, where you're going to have a lot of volume in order to get up to that minimum wage amount, because they're really looking at how much income are you going to be making from the business. Deborah, would it work for us to move to Paris for a year and use it as a base to figure out where in France we ultimately want to land? Our thoughts are, besides wanting time in Paris, that it might be a more straightforward place to handle visas, etc., while we find a desired spot in France to settle. Yeah, so you can certainly move to a place in one part of France and then move somewhere else. A couple of things. One is that you do want to establish a long-term lease within 90 days so that you have bills in your name and the various things that you're going to need to be able to do all of your French admin, like getting set up in the French healthcare system, exchanging your driver's license, all of those things that need to be done in the first year, registering your self-employment activity if you're going to be a micro entrepreneur. Absolutely use the time to travel around France, figure out where you want to land long term. You do have to be in your location where you're going to be living. Like, there's a lot of admin to do. So if you're on certain types of visas, you're going to have multiple OP visits. If you're retired, you're only going to have the one main medical visit, but you really don't want to miss it. You want to make sure that you're there regularly enough to check your mail, so that if you send in your application to the healthcare system and they send back a letter requesting more documents, you're not missing their deadline. So there's a lot of things to take care of administratively in the first year. And, there's certainly opportunities to travel, but you don't want to be moving around the majority of your time. And you certainly don't want to be hopping from temporary location without establishing a permanent address, because that is just going to absolutely screw you over in terms of doing all of your French admin that you need to do. The other thing I would say that you want to avoid is, when you are moving, you want to avoid doing it around the time that you're renewing your visa. So the changes of address are done through the visa renewal platform. If you have a visitor visa, a talent visa, a lot of types of visas, you're doing the renewal online and then picking up your visa application, picking up your new carte de séjour in the local prefecture. If your change of address is in progress, a lot of times you cannot start a new procedure, meaning that if your change of address is not validated, you can't start the process to renew your visa. It's a little bit of a pain. So you want to be a little bit careful in terms of timing. In some cases, it's better to just renew your visa with the old address, even if it means traveling from like Bordeaux back to Paris to pick up your card, or from Montpellier to Lyon, wherever, and then starting the change of address process after you get the new card. Or you submit the renewal and include the new address and do the address change at the same time as the renewal. That's fine. Lori, my husband has health issues. We know pre-existing conditions are not covered on the visa health insurance policy. We just need to know what we do in that instance if something happens to him. How detrimental could the out-of-pocket cost be? Or would we completely be denied a visa because we don't have adequate coverage in the first place? Okay, so there's no health requirement for the visa. Pre-existing conditions are not a thing in France. They're just conditions. But it is true that the temporary policies that you need to get will not cover them. My best recommendation is to look up some of the treatments and the costs associated with them, because my suspicion is that the amount you would pay out of pocket in France is going to be lower than the amount that you would pay as a copay with insurance in the US in most cases. Blood tests, x-rays, MRIs, you're looking at maybe a couple €100, and by a couple hundred, I mean really 200 at the high end. Surgery or real treatment like that, inpatient, can get expensive. We actually have a client who moved to France and then a couple months later got diagnosed with leukemia before she even had her health card. The social worker has been really good about helping to get her file, contact Emily and see if her file has been processed yet. Usually hospitals are not at all in a rush to make you pay, but you can look up the Social Security cost for different types of procedures out of pocket and see what that looks like. Do you keep a US PO box or other physical address of a friend or family member just to have an address to remain tied to for a while at least? Yeah, a lot of people do that. I use a family member's address. Some people don't, or they lose access to that address after a certain amount of time. And you just have to anticipate it a little bit and make sure that whatever banks or institutions you're using can accommodate the foreign address or whatever not temporary, but whatever like PO box address you use. Terry, requirements for an EU citizen, American with an Italian passport, married to an American, both wanting to live full or part-time in Paris. Okay, so what you have to do is the process is a little bit different when you're the spouse of an EU citizen who is not French. So you need to relocate to France first, find a place to live within 90 days, and the EU person has to sponsor the non-EU person by exercising their treaty rights. And what that means is, as the Italian citizen, you have to show that you have financial resources and health coverage, and that you can sponsor your non-EU partner to reside in France. Now, the financial resources can be one of many different things. Either it's savings or pension because you retired. It could be that you have a job and you're working, you're supporting your partner through your salary, or you're self-employed and supporting them through your self-employment activity, etc. Obviously, as an EU citizen, you are allowed to live and work in France without condition, basically, except for the fact that you need to be financially supporting yourself. You can't rely on the French state in order to do that. So your partner or your spouse has to apply for a carte de séjour within 90 days of arrival, meaning you've established the long-term address and you have the proof of health coverage and financial resources to show for that. Christy, can I use my already established LLC US base for the Profession Libérale visa? Not solely. You need to have a business plan for your future French activity, and you will need to set up a French business activity in France, whether that's self-employment through micro-entrepreneur or something else. If my business income falls short in the first year, can I still qualify to renew my Profession Libérale visa if my savings makes up the difference? Be really careful. 3 years ago, I would have said absolutely, not a problem. But the official criteria is that they are looking at what income comes in from your business. So if your business is not making that much money and it looks like you are not very serious about running the business, you're going to potentially have issues. And they are cracking down on Profession Libérale, especially. They are only taking into account income from the business. There was actually somebody on YouTube, I want to say it was an American, but who had her visa not renewed because she was not making very much money in her Profession Libérale. And she did this whole video about how she was being kicked out of France for being poor. Well, no, her visa was not renewed because she had not been meeting the requirements for renewing it. Sometimes in the first year, they can be a little bit lenient in the case of, if you're almost there and you're making a good effort, but due to circumstances or because you had to take 600 hours of OP French classes, you didn't quite have all the time that you needed to get the business up and running. Or, oh, it was the first year, but look, I have contracts for year 2 and I still have money and I promise I'll do better next year. Like, they might be lenient in the first year, but it's really very much at their discretion whether or not they're going to be. Sue, I just arrived in Paris with my VLSTS visa on Saturday, July 5th. What should I do first? Should I scan the QR code on my visa immediately or wait till I have found an apartment? The very first thing you need to do is you need to get into a long-term address where you can get mail. Do not validate your visa or do any other French admin until you have a long-term address where you can get mail. And you need to do that within 90 days. Barry, I will eventually be applying for school in Switzerland, but the program only meets in person twice a year. So I'd like to live in France while doing coursework online and travel to Switzerland twice a year. Would this affect the visa that I need in order to live in France? Well, you're not eligible to get a student visa for France because 1, your program is not in France, and 2, your program is virtual. So you will need to find another way to qualify for a visa. I mean, you can certainly be on a visitor visa and not work, including remotely, but that's not necessarily going to be a great long-term solution, especially if you want to continue living in France and looking for jobs and things like that after your studies. So I would suggest taking a look at foolproof French visas to see what visa types you might qualify for. Recent posting in online forum states one must obtain an avis sur la viabilité économique de votre projet de création d'activité before applying for a visa. Yes, that is a new, well, it's not really a new requirement, but it has been expanded to all profession libérale applications as of about 2 weeks ago. We applied early June for visas and nothing of the sort was requested. That's because it was before the change was implemented. What's your latest estimate of BLS contact turnaround time from interview to formal responses? I would expect that you would have already gotten a response. So if you applied early June and you haven't gotten anything back yet, that's worrisome to me. It could be that they received the direction to get this certificate of viability and they had already received your applications and then they submitted the request and they're waiting for approval. However, normal turnaround time for a visa should be about 7 to 10 days, and it's unexpected that it would be taking longer than that. I've heard it's difficult to get a job teaching English in France, even if it's in a private school. It's not difficult to get a job teaching English. It's difficult to make a living with a job teaching English. They're not very well paid. It's a little bit unclear too. Like, do you mean just a job teaching English, or do you specifically mean a job in a school teaching English? Because for jobs in schools, there are a lot of requirements, and a lot of times, you're required to pass a concours. Even if you're in a school that is private, there's a lot of competition for very few jobs, and the jobs are not well paid. So in terms of getting a job that would sponsor you to teach English, difficult. What about being an assistant in a school? That's not really a thing in France. They're lucky if they get a teacher in front of every classroom, much less assistants. If you are there's something called an AESH, an AESH, and those are assistants for children with learning difficulties or physical handicaps who are integrated into regular classrooms, but who have the right to a certain number of hours of assistance. They're usually paid like 800 euros a month. And you're there most of the day, most of the school day with the kids. You're not paid for the 2-hour lunch break or the recess or anything like that. So it's basically a full-time time commitment with part-time pay. Are there relocation agencies that sole purpose is to secure a rental for you before you arrive in France? Yes, and we have most of our clients work with one because it can be really difficult to get an apartment as a foreigner. So the costs vary widely. Typically, you want to do it about 6 weeks or so 6 to 8 weeks before you want to be in your apartment. What we advise is 4 to 6 weeks in an Airbnb for your temporary housing on your visa application, and using that time to hit the ground running and do as many visits and as much work as you can to secure a long stay lease or a long-term lease within that time frame. Kimberly, can Allison speak about applying for one of the working visas, profession libérale or talent passport, with a business plan for work in which you have a background but are not currently doing it in your country of origin? Thank you. Okay, yeah. So when we it doesn't really matter whether or not you are currently doing the work. You don't have to have an existing business to apply for a profession libérale or a talent passport visa. What matters is obviously if you have the background, describing your professional experience and why that leads you to want to start this particular business in France, and to the opportunities that are on the ground. So a lot of the work is just developing the business idea. And if you're working with us, Amy and I coaching you on that a little bit and helping you to put your ideas into a format and a structure that's going to make sense in terms of the business plan and in terms of what the consulate and the Ministry of the Economy are looking for. For profession libérale, there's a big focus on having potential clients or connections where you're going to have business activity in France. So that can be the most challenging part. If you're not already doing the business, if you don't already have people that you're going to be able to work with right when you arrive. So if you don't know those things off the top of your head, then as we're working on the business plan, we're also brainstorming connections with you and helping you figure out, okay, who can I reach out to? Where can I get some potential letters of interest? It doesn't necessarily have to be contracts. Oh, I'm going to pay Kimberly X amount of money for Y project over Z period of time after she arrives in France with her visa. It doesn't have to be that. But, people who are either willing to potentially work with you or consider you for a project or introduce you to other people who might need you, that kind of thing. And it's really about showing that you know what the requirements for your business are going to be, whether that's regulatory or like structure wise, that you're selecting the right business structure, that you're going to be able to make money doing that particular activity, that you know what the market is in France, and that you're going to be able to start earning money within that first year. Mickey, if I have an address in France, can I start the process now to obtain something, even if I am not physically in France for 3 months? So I'm not sure what something is. I assume it's a visa, but you need to plan to have your visa start when you're going to be arriving in France. So saw something on social media the other day where somebody said, "Oh, I applied for a visa, but they gave me a visa that starts today's date and I'm not moving until the end of September." And I said, "Well, you applied for a visa way too early if you're not able to go for 2 months and the visa starts now." There's a lot of admin that you need to do within the first 90 days. And if you do not show up within the first 90 days of your visa, you are missing a lot of opportunity to get things done. And your renewal is probably going to be more difficult because of it. So if you have an address in France, then that's great for your visa application, but that's not the only consideration. And there's a lot of other stuff that needs to be prepared. And again, like, the most important thing is, when are you going to arrive in France and how long does it take to prepare the visa application? If I apply for the talent entrepreneur visa, do my clients need to be physically located in France, or can they be across Europe and global? Yeah, so for the talent entrepreneur, there's a little bit less of a focus on proving that you have clients in France. I mean, there are questions that we answer about the economic benefit to France for approving your project, but they're not asking for contracts and potential clients and evidence of potential clients in France in the same way. All right, currently working for an engineering consulting company as a W-2 employee. If I talk the consulting firm into making me a 1099 employee, which is a contractor, not an employee, could I get the talent or profession liberale while still working for the consulting firm? Yes. So that would just involve issuing an invoice which corresponds to the amount for the 1099 to the company that is paying you. Again, if one company is your primary client, or the vast majority of your income, and you don't really plan on having other clients, you're much better off going with a company structure than a profession libérale, because when you're profession libérale and you're set up as auto entrepreneur, the expectation is that you're going to have more than one client, because otherwise it looks like a disguised work contract. It looks like there's some company out there that is cheating the French government of the social charges that they should be paying on you as an employee. The social charges for a micro entrepreneur are lower than the social charges on an employee, and the taxes are lower. So if you only have one client, there's a very good chance that it would not be considered a contract. It would be considered a salaried work contract, in which case, visa-wise and tax-wise, you and the company would both be in trouble. So if the goal is to have that one company be your main client, you set up a French company, or you do something called a portage salarial. But portage salarial is a little bit tricky when you need a visa. So typically the best way to insulate yourself from problems is to set up a French company and do the talent entrepreneur. Is one of the visas a better path to citizenship? So in order to get a path to French citizenship, typically you need to be making money, declaring income, and paying social charges and income taxes in France. There was actually a couple of British citizens who were rejected for French citizenship recently. There was an article in one of the papers, one of the online publications about it, because all of their income was foreign sourced. So in Foolproof French visas, we cover like what the paths to citizenship are, if they exist, for each visa type. But that's one of the main things to keep in mind. So if you're just renewing a visitor visa every year, especially as an American, when you're not paying income taxes on your US pension, it's a bit up in the air whether or not you would ever be approved for French citizenship or for a 10-year resident card. John, I understand that finding teaching positions can be difficult, or teacher's assistants a thing in France. Would it be easier to get one of those? So there's something called TAPIF, the Teaching Assistant Program in France, which is for college graduates under, I think, 30 or 35 to teach English in French public schools for 1 year. You're paid about 800 euros a month. The visa is not renewable. So if you want a short-term way to be in France for a little bit, then that's something that you can do. Normally, the application deadline is sometime in like January for the following academic year. So you'd submit your applications in January 26th for the 26-27 school year. But again, in terms of just being an assistant in a school, that's not really a job that is very common or that really exists in France. Rebecca, can you explain what a gîte is compared to an Airbnb? Airbnb is just a platform. So any short-term rental can be on the Airbnb platform, assuming that it's legal. A gîte is a self-contained rental property. So it means that usually it has a separate entrance. So it can be either a whole apartment or it can be a house that is rented out as a complete entity, but it's not shared with anybody else. John, is it expensive and or difficult to register a business in France? It depends on what type of business. If you're talking about a self-employment activity and being micro-entrepreneur, no, it's not expensive. There are no fees associated with registering for micro-entrepreneur. There may occasionally be like some minor fees if you change your address or something, but it doesn't cost anything beyond social charges. If you are registering a company, then yes, you need some legal documents drafted. We work with an attorney who drafts the legal documents for our clients. You need to have accounting done regularly, and they do bookkeeping as well. There are fees to register the company. There are fees for everything. Okay, Amber, so if your income is above $80,000 and you have a lot of expenses, then I would say we want to talk about doing a talent entrepreneur, not a profession libérale. Older adult going back to grad school, living off my Social Security. Would I be able to get a visa and move to Paris with my Social Security check while applying for schools there? So it depends a little bit on the situation. So you can absolutely get a visitor visa and do some type of school program. However, a couple of things to keep in mind. One is there's not an age limit for being a student, but you would need to have an actual student visa rather than a visitor visa in order to do internships and things like that, which may be required for a lot of grad programs. Most master's degrees require an internship. The other thing is getting a job at the end of your studies. If you're on a student visa, then typically you need to switch to another visa status in order to stay. Now, typically what that means is starting a business. So, you can be self-employed or getting a job and getting sponsored for that job. Now, if you do a degree program that's 2 years and you earn your degree from a French university that is accredited, then companies can have an easier time sponsoring you for a visa. There are certain things they don't have to prove they tried to hire a French person, even if the salary for that sponsorship is low. The salary amount to hire somebody on a passeport talent salarié also just decreased a little bit a couple weeks ago when the new decree about the auto entrepreneur visas was issued. However, if older student means you're in your 50s or your early 60s, be aware that that is a demographic with extremely high unemployment and that it's going to be very difficult to get a job at that age. So are you going to grad school with the intention of still working for a couple of years? Are you going with the intention of just studying? What are you going to do afterwards? Because it might not be easy to switch to something else depending on what your plans are. Elizabeth, is there a demand for very experienced master commercial or industrial electricians, not engineers, in France? Could a US qualified master electrician qualify for a talent visa? Unfortunately, that is a field where I do not think the credentials for a US electrician are going to transfer at all. So unfortunately, I don't think that career is viable in France. We got visitor visas and have hit a snag regards to selling our house prior to going. We don't want to pay capital gains in the two countries. Everything I've read says we have a year to sell, but my husband is concerned that they could still try to charge capital gains in France. Any thoughts? My thoughts are that because professionals all over the internet tell you have a year, I'm not sure why he's concerned that that's not true. So if you've consulted with, or if you have watched materials from accountants, which that's a question that we have very often when we do Q&As with our accountants and presentations like the one that we had a couple weeks ago. That's a question that comes up all the time. So if you've looked at professional sources, you should rely on those. How do you feel about the new guidelines for starting a business under 77,000 euros a year teaching exercise classes primarily in English? Do you think that the visa might be harder to get approved? I don't really have particular feelings about the new requirements. I mean, I think that it's really important to make sure that people are having business plans that are economically viable and that they're aware that they actually have to do the business and make money doing the business in order to stay in France. Now, we haven't had any problems, and I don't anticipate having any problems because we do a lot of work with our clients developing the business plan idea and making sure that they understand how it's going to work before they actually get here. So I don't think this is going to be a problem for the people who are really serious. For certain categories of people, it used to be a little bit of a piece of cake to the point of being a little bit unserious sometimes who got approved. And then I've seen a lot of people who they got the visa, they came to France, and then they didn't even know they had to register their business, or they didn't, or somebody told them the wrong thing. So they waited 6 months to register it because they thought they had to register for the healthcare system first. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the people who ended up in those situations where they weren't clear on what they had to do and they got the visa a little bit by pure luck and they didn't realize that that's the beginning of the process, not the end of the process. Those people I think are going to be in for some disappointment in the coming months. John, I think I will need to pay for a consult with you. I'm confused on what to do with my husband's remote work job with his one client. He only makes $48,000 a month. Do you mean a year? I think the talent visa. Oh, okay. You mean a year. I think the talent visa would be overkill. I'd love for him to be able to be self-employed and go with the micro entrepreneur and pay less taxes. But it sounds like that would not be possible with one client. Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult. If he had a second client that was even here and there 1,000 euros, then it could potentially be doable. But the challenge now is if it looks like a disguised work contract in the business plan, then we're going to have trouble getting the business plan approved to begin with. So it really depends. Okay, yes, I'm 50 plus and was laid off in the US and dream of learning the language and getting my MA in arts management. I started my online author book and accessories. So I plan on going to school, then working in the arts. So yeah, so you might actually want to do a self-employment visa if you already have some income streams, because that's going to enable you to work at the same time as you're studying potentially. If we end up not using our visas, do we just leave it in our passport books? What else would you do? You can't remove pages from your passport. So yes, you just have to not validate your visa if you don't show up in France, or if you show up but you decide you're not staying. I've wanted to teach Pilates, yoga, and know there aren't a ton of classes in English in Paris. I've had trouble finding some. So I'm thinking of starting a business and teaching classes and do anticipate making enough money. We have people who are yoga teachers, and I can think of like 3 different clients who are yoga teachers off the top of my head. So that's not an issue. That's not an issue at all. And a lot of times, if you've been integrated into the community a little bit in Paris and you know what the market is or the landscape is for that type of service, then you potentially already have people that you could reach out to for interest letters as well. All right, cool. So just as a reminder, we have the link for foolproof French visas here. I'm going to put the link in the chat too for requesting a proposal from us. I don't have any consultations available before the end of August. I am booked up, but we do still have some room to start with clients. So if you would like to work with us on your relocation, we have the proposal request form there in the chat. The next Q&A is going to be on Monday, September 8th, which is the second Monday of September, since the first Monday is the first day back to school. And remember that these Q&As are meant to be an introduction to the issues and pointing you in the right direction for certain things, but these are really complex topics. If you are planning on moving, it's really important to get the right professional assistance so you don't have issues with the visa or with certain admin not getting done, making sure that you can renew your visa at the end of your first year, that you get on the French healthcare system in a timely fashion, et cetera, et cetera. So I will give everybody a minute or so to click on the links, and then we're going to close out for the summer. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good rest of your summer, and I will see you in September. Bye.